In the same way that companies that we invest in, it's easy for them to miss key trends. If we are not thinking about these things as an investment team, we can also miss some of the key trends. The hardest question, I suppose, that most investors want to know.
It's important for us to ask the hard questions.
The hard question that I'll be speaking about today is, how do we spot innovative companies, and what traits do we see across these innovative companies? Hi, I'm Victor Mupunga. I'm a senior investment analyst at Old Mutual Wealth Private Client Securities. When I think of innovation, my mind goes back to 1997, to a company that was a few months from bankruptcy. Now, for now, this company will remain nameless, but it was experiencing all of the characteristics that one would expect from a company on the brink of failure. At that time, the company had not grown revenue for the last decade. It was losing market share to other competitors. From a product quality perspective, this business had inferior products. About 10% of all the products that they sold needed to be repaired or replaced under warranty. In the preceding year, this company had to write off close to 20% of their inventory as obsolete. Now, at that time, this business was almost bought out by a competitor because there was a widely held view that they would not be able to make it alone. Now, to cut the long story short, the deal fell through to buy this company, management was replaced, and this business was eventually bailed out thanks to an investment from Microsoft. Now, I'm sure some of you might have already guessed by now that the business that I'm referring to is Apple, that in 1997 was a few months from bankruptcy. This was a business that in the 80s was innovative, but it lost its way in the 90s. And this is what Steve Jobs had to say was wrong with Apple back in 1996. He said the problem with Apple was that they stood still. Competitors caught up with it, and its differentiation was eroded. In other words, Apple stopped innovating. Now, if we look from then onwards, over the last 2.5 decades, we know how that story has played out. Apple has gone on to innovate some of the best technologies that we enjoy today, starting from the iPod, the iPhone, the iPad, etc. But this is not only in the past tense. Even today, Apple continues to make incremental innovation on all of those products that I've mentioned. And one of the biggest shifts that we're seeing right now from a global company perspective is the shift that we're seeing in Apple from a hardware business to a software business. Even if we look ahead, there's a lot of optionality in Apple in terms of healthcare, the Apple Car, or augmented reality. I think the key lesson that we can take away from Apple is that you cannot stop innovating. The moment you stop innovating, your differentiation is eroded. Now, while most of us think of innovation as being something that is confined to technology companies, some of the most innovative companies are actually outside of technology, and one such company is Danaher. If we look at the S&P 500, over the last 30 years, Danaher is amongst the top 20 best performing companies in that index. But what makes Danaher even more remarkable is not only the performance over the last 3 decades, but it's the fact that 3 decades ago, Danaher was a completely different business. They manufactured tires and they were real estate investment companies. Over the years, Danaher has always managed to shift its portfolio towards emerging technologies. And today, the company is at the cutting edge of modern science. Today, the bulk of their revenue is generated from biopharmaceuticals, which is a subsegment within the pharmaceutical sector, genomic medicine, and messenger RNA technology. That's a far cry from a tire manufacturer. Danaher's management attribute a lot of this innovation to the philosophy of constant improvement. This is part of their culture. And in fact, Danaher adopted this culture back in the 80s, a philosophy that's known as Kaizen, continuous improvement, from Japanese manufacturers. This is a philosophy that Toyota ascribes or still follows up until this very moment. And this is the mindset of continuously innovative every part of your business. Now, Toyota, as I mentioned, applied to their manufacturing. Danaher applies this philosophy of continuous innovation to all of their business processes, from sales, strategy, inventory management, mergers and acquisition. The end result is that almost every notable business that Danaher has acquired over the last couple of decades, they've been able to improve on their profitability. And that speaks to a culture of innovation. A company or companies that are innovative or that were innovative in the past are more likely to continue to be innovative in the future if the culture is right. Now, we mentioned earlier that one of the ways to identify innovative companies is by looking at how much they spend on research and development. Amazon stands out when we look at the last 2 years. They've spent the most on R&D amongst all the companies that are listed on the S&P 500. In fact, over the last 2 years, Amazon has spent over $100 billion on fulfillment centers and distribution hubs. This has allowed them to double the amount of fulfillment centers that they had leading up to the pandemic. So what took them 25 years to build, they managed to double that in just 2 years. Now, what's very interesting about the most recent fulfillment centers that Amazon has been able to build is that they rely a lot more on technology. And this is speaking to robots, machine learning, machine vision, and the like. I'll give an example of Amazon's fulfillment centers in that the fulfillment centers that they built back in the early 2000s, it would take them close to 20 hours for them to move a package through the center. That's from the time that an order is made up until the package gets out of the facility. Today, with the facilities that they're building now, it takes Amazon about 2 hours to move that same package out of the fulfillment centers. And that's thanks to the improvements that they've made that have compounded over time. And that's one of the exciting things when you think of technology, that most of us appreciate that investment returns tend to compound over time. But very few people actually think of innovation as operating the same way, in that over time, innovation also has the habit to compound. And so when you think about other global businesses such as Alphabet, they tend to hire the most number of PhDs globally. Over time, that compounds. Givaudan is another company. They hire the most number of scientists specifically around food tasting. And as a result of that, that also compounds. Johnson & Johnson is another similar company that recently reported that 25% of their 2021 sales came from products that they launched in the last 5 years alone. Now, the list of companies that fail to do these things, these innovative things, and those that have failed, many books have been written about them. And there are many key lessons that one can draw from what these companies did not do. However, I want to highlight one example, just one company, and take you back again to 1996 or 1997, when Apple was battling for survival and a few months from bankruptcy. Another technology firm had just launched the first internet-enabled phone. In 1998, this company was the world's largest cell phone maker. A few years later, this very same company was the first to launch a prototype of the touchscreen phone. In 2007, half of all the smartphones that were sold were Nokia. And yet today, despite Nokia still selling cell phones, I cannot recall when I last came across a user of a Nokia phone. So Nokia's management made several mistakes, but I'm going to highlight just 3. The first being that they missed market trends. They didn't believe that touchscreens would be popular. The second mistake that they made is that they didn't invest in new technology. They moved too slowly and they lost market share to Android and iOS. The third mistake that they made is that when they realized that they were falling behind, they were not quick enough to admit their error and to change course. And those are the things to avoid when looking at innovative companies. So you avoid the mistakes that have fallen to the likes of Nokia, and you focus on companies that invest in R&D and that have a culture of innovation. And this, we believe, helps us to spot the trends within innovative companies. Thank you.